Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential because when you keep growing, we all get stronger. And we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts here with my friend and co-host, Ken Miller. Ken, how are you?
Good, Wendy. How you doing?
I am great. Today's topic is going to be fun. It's probably going to be more fun for Ken and I because we were on a call and we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do for this episode. And we started talking about our non-negotiables. And what we mean by that are what are the 5 things that Ken and I must do before we go to the gym, and wanted to kind of see if it correlates to maybe something that you guys do as well. Or if you don't try it, maybe something to consider the next time you walk through those doors, or maybe even talk to your clients about. So today, 5 non-negotiables for an optimal workout. Ken, what do you think?
The thing is like, I know we hit the number 5, but when it comes to the non-negotiable, I came up with 10. So it was hard for me to narrow it down to the 5 must-do things when it comes to my workouts, whether it's what I do before I leave the house or when I'm at the gym, what must be a part of my workout. So Wendy, I'll start it off in the fact that, as I'm getting older, I'm realizing my joints aren't moving as well or as much as I'm used to them moving, because it used to be, and I think we're all right there when it comes to, okay, stand up, I can touch my toes, no problem. But now it's like, okay, I'm good if I touch my shoelaces, right? So my first non-negotiable is working on your mobility.
Ah.
Can you get your arms and your legs and your neck and your spine to turn and reach and flex and extend where you want them to or where you need them to? So mobility is my first non-negotiable.
I had that as number 2, just so you know.
Okay.
And for the exact same reasons. I notice as I'm getting older, and hopefully you guys are not experiencing this. If you are experiencing it, then welcome to the club. But in the mornings when I wake up, I hear everything in my body pop. I get up and my ankles, my toes, there's no way to slightly, even go to the bathroom in the mornings without everyone knowing I'm awake, because they can just hear things moving around. And so to your point, mobility is something that is a non-negotiable. It's my number 2, but I think taking time to foam roll and trying to get, better blood flow through the muscles that I know are going to be super overactive just based on what I've seen in my assessments and then how I feel. If not, I'll grab my percussion device and I'll use that as soon as I get out of the shower even. But before I go to the gym, if I'm not going to do it there because I'm short on time, but I have more time at home, then I will foam roll and do some static stretches for sure.
And I think one of the things that hit home for me with this is that I have a 15-year-old client, and I know you, Wendy, you have clients of different ages. And we're not just talking, when we talk about mobility and range of motion and flexibility, we're not just talking about us, in our age group, but not just those that are 60 plus. But I've got a client who's 16, 15 years old, and he has range of motion issues because of the sport that he plays. He plays baseball. And from that vantage point, he does, he's a right-handed thrower, he's a right-handed batter, and he has a bias to turn right to left, but his left to right motion is limited. So, when I talk about mobility, or when I consider mobility for myself, I reflect on my client as young as he is. Mobility might be and he does that both fall, spring, and summer. So from that vantage point, mobility, I think, we like to think that we're going to be flexible and like Gumby for a long time. But if you're younger and you're already noticing mobility issues, this is one of those that I really can't emphasize enough, that it's going to, and this is why it's my number one, Wendy. Mobility carries over to other aspects of movement and how you feel and how you perform. So that's why it's my number one.
Well, and just to give you guys a story of something that's very recent, if you guys have a chance to follow Miles Russell, he is a 15-year-old golfer that I met at the Junior Invitational a couple months ago. And he is now like just crushing it right now. At his age, he's breaking all kinds of records. He's one of the youngest that was in a tournament, now playing in a tournament with the older crew, and he will be an up and coming PGA guy in no time. And he's 15. But the reason why I want to bring him up is when we have these in little, and I say little, they start anywhere from 14 to 18. That's the athlete age group that is allowed to come and get invited to the Junior Invitational. And it is a golf tournament that is, they do it over 3 days. They come and spend 5 days with us. And every morning he was the first one on my table. He was also the first one when he got off the course to get back on my table for us to do some manual therapy and stretching. And we use the percussion device on all of these kids. And so to your point, starting early will help you for when you're later in life, being able to move and feel better, especially if you are playing a repetitive sport such as baseball or in his case, golf. So check him out though. Miles Russell. Amazing. And I absolutely adored him. He was I shouldn't say one of my favorites because I loved them all, but because he was so small, he reminded me a lot of my son. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So of course, I don't know. I just loved him, but mobility works. That's two for me. Do you want to know what my number one was?
I want to know what your number one is.
Coffee.
What is it?
Coffee. I must have coffee before I go to the gym. I must have coffee actually before I leave the house. If everyone wants me to be the polite, fun person that I am, I love coffee. I love to have the warmth go down. I like what it does for me. If you guys have had a chance to look at some of the research about how positive coffee can be, especially before you go to a workout to kind of get your mindset right. If it's just one of those things. Now you can add things into your coffee. I know some people add creatine. They'll add other types of things into I think, what is it? Element has some kind of, I don't know exactly what the Element stuff is that it does in the coffee, but it helps too, to keep you from being dehydrated. So there are a lot of things that I do, and there are a lot of positive benefits and things that you can add instead of having some type of shake. I have coffee.
Yeah, coffee did not make my top 10, but it is one of those that I will have first thing in the morning. And my usual workout time is in the morning. So now that you bring that up, Wendy, it is a part of my morning routine when it comes to how I prepare my body for my workout, because I'm at the point now where I can't eat too much before a workout. But when I do have my morning caffeine, like what you're talking about with coffee, I do put creatine in mine. I do put Element as well. It's funny that you bring that up because the electrolytes. So
electrolytes, that's the word I was looking for. I'm like,
what? Oh, that's what I thought there was something special you were reaching for.
No, my husband's all about adding Element into his coffee. Yeah. I do not. However, that's his go-to. That's his creamer.
Oh, yeah. So, but Element also has a chocolate. They have a chocolate flavor.
Mint.
Yeah, chocolate mint. That's what I put in my coffee. So I'll split up a packet. I'll put a packet in a separate container of water, about 32 ounces of water, and I'll put the other part of the packet in my coffee, along with some ghee butter, my creatine, and
you do the butter in your coffee, really?
It adds a little texture. I like it, and then I'll put a little PB2, a little powdered peanut butter in there. So it's a coffee. My kids call it a coffee shake, but that's basically what starts me off in the morning. I get my workout in, and then I have my breakfast basically after my workout.
All
And I
right. So
feel good.
as you guys can tell on our 5 non-negotiables here today on Random Fit with myself, Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, we didn't discuss this. We decided that we were going to keep this between just myself and Ken. We were going to talk about it here today on the show. And so my number 1 was coffee. My number 2 was mobility. Ken's number 1 was mobility, but we did find out, I guess there is a little bit of the coffee in him as well. So
Yeah.
Ken, what would be your number 2?
Well, my number 2 was core, right? And core.
That's my number 3, by the way.
Man, we're just right, almost right there. So when I think of core, it's not just the 6-pack. Well, I know my days of 6-packing are gone, but when we think core, it's more than just that midsection. I'm also including the hip complex, right? So my glutes, but I'm also looking at activating my upper back, right? So my postural muscles up the spine, my scapular muscles to help, especially with overhead movements. So from that vantage point, core work is my number 2, just because of the foundation of waking up all my spinal muscles. And that's why it was my number 2.
So I had it as my number 3 because technically because you didn't count coffee. The reason I had core was for the same thing. Guys, remember we've talked multiple times about the importance of core. We have intervertebral stability, which is just a fancy word to say we're trying to activate the little muscles that protect vertebrae to vertebrae to make sure that the spine stays in proper alignment and can handle whatever it is we're going to do throughout the workout. And I'm a big advocate of adding, and I was more specific, more glute bridges. That is a non-negotiable. And anyone that's ever trained with me, I don't care what phase of training they're in, after they've foam rolled, after they've stretched, and I do this myself, we immediately will go into some glute bridging. And for your reasons of what you said, we're trying to activate the glutes, make sure the hips are opened up, because we know that the glutes are a primarily underactive muscle because we sit on it a lot. And so we want to make sure that we're opening up the hips, we're getting the glutes to activate, and maintaining movement patterns for me that we know that the spine is in elongated position throughout. We're not getting spinal motion. We're really just getting the hips moving to activate that. It's kind of a 2-for-1 deal for me. So I was more specific of saying my non-negotiable in the core was the glute bridge.
Yeah. And as far as a specific exercise, you bring up a bridge. My specific exercise is a scaption. Just because of the upper body. I have a tendency to slouch for all the sports that I did in high school. It brought me into that forward shoulder, forward head posture, especially as I got older. Those are things that I'm always working on, as far as getting my shoulders to come up and back and get my shoulder blades to sit on my rib cage a little bit better, just so I don't elevate my shoulders. So basically when I say elevate, my shoulders get closer to the ears or they come forward a little bit. But for me, because as we've talked about in other podcasts, I do a little bit of jujitsu. I like to throw the ball with my son and do a little volleyball with my daughter when we can. So a lot of arm motions, right? I'm overhead, I'm throwing to the side, I'm catching, I'm reaching. So for me, it's more about making sure that my spine moves better and that I can rotate. And from that vantage point, I just want to see that my whole shoulder girdle, so my shoulder blade and my glenohumeral joint, or my shoulder, they work well together. And that's where doing that scaption or a T or a cobra, anything where I'm reaching and I can get those shoulder blades to move a little bit better, that's something that I do just for when I'm awake, as well as my activities.
Well, and it's interesting because as you know, I teach at a university, and when we talk about cobras, it's interesting you brought that up. Oftentimes people think of the yoga cobra, and we would just want you to know that we're not talking about that. So Ken, do you do it if you're in a prone position or you're laying flat and your chin is tucked and you're on the floor, so your stomach's on the floor, you're looking at the ground, you tuck your chin, so you're not looking up, you're trying to maintain proper alignment, your palms are touching the floor. all you're doing is just externally rotating or turning your thumbs up towards the ceiling and trying to drive your hands back to your hips and then bringing them forward. And so getting that motion is working on the scapulothoracic rhythm, or basically the rhythm that you're talking about, to where the shoulders and everything are moving in proper alignment to get that position. So I always make that clarification, because I've noticed more and more when we talk about the Cobra, they're like, how does that how does that work? And so just, I wanted to be a little more specific when he said that, just to ensure that we're on the same page, that it's not the yoga Cobra, we're talking about the exercise Cobra.
Right. And thanks for doing that, because I get asked the same thing too. It's like, how does that work on the shoulders? So thanks for clarifying that, Wendy, because we do have a lot more people out there now that are participating in yoga, so that delineation definitely needs to be cleared. So that's my go-to as far as my core work goes. So Wendy, I'll go into my number 3. So next down my list is balance.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah. So doing something on a single leg. And again, I know so far with mobility, core, and then balance, I know we're just going through the components of movement preparation, but that's where if I don't get those fundamental components in my workout done every time, then I know I don't feel as good. So when I incorporate balance, this can be a standalone. So when we say balance just means varying degrees of being on one leg, whether I'm standing still, doing a squat on a single leg, or even a hop to where I am jumping off of and landing on one foot. Balance has been something that I've done every workout, but I can say that from the vantage point that it can be a standalone exercise where I can deliberately say to myself, this is a balance exercise. I am being purposeful and intentional when it comes to incorporating this. But I can also have it so that if I'm doing something a little extra, like if I'm doing my arms or my shoulder work, something ancillary in my workouts, I'll just say, okay, I'm just going to balance right now. That way I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone when it comes to getting my balance done and doing something that's more for cosmetics, like a bicep curl.
Very good. I kind of had that towards the end. I didn't put it as a standalone. My next one, so my number 4. And once again, if you have trained with me, you know this is exactly what my expectations of you are. Meaning, if you get to the gym early and you've foam rolled and you've stretched and you've done your bridges, the next thing I expect to see out of you, and I do for myself, again, does not matter what phase of training you're in. This is something that is a non-negotiable. If you work with me or you come and work out with me, is we go into lateral tube walks. So we do more of a dynamic stretch. So I do activate the glutes first, really trying to focus more on the prime mover of the glute. And then when we go into the lateral tube walk, I'm really trying to get those hip external rotators, the small muscles. So the glute, I'm talking really the glute medius here, trying to get that to kick on as well, because I want to ensure unfortunately, I am prone to having my feet turn outward, and sometimes my knees come inward. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm minimizing the chances of any of that happening before I go into my actual workout. So I will put a band of whatever color is good for my client. I'll have them use that. I'll grab the band for myself, and maintaining proper alignment. And I think that's one of the things that I see a lot when people are doing lateral tube walking, is they start doing this teapot thing. Do you know what I mean by that? Like you're leaning with your shoulder and then your body goes, and you lean with your shoulder. So it's almost like they're trying to do like this bad move, like dance move or something, but it should be that your shoulder, your knee, and your hip are staying properly aligned. You know, I'm thinking about Axl Rose right now doing his little oh sweet child of mine a thing on video, but it's not that. You really want to maintain shoulder, knee, and hip, and making sure that you're keeping that movement pattern, leading with that alignment, and then the other trail leg follows. It doesn't slide. You pick it up, you get back into the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints so that your shoulder to hip width apart. You'll step outward again, then bring it in. And so you're trying to really ensure that that hip is leading the charge and that your shoulder isn't the primary movement, and then the rest follows.
So when you say that little teapot thing, you're not putting one hand on your hip and then doing
Yeah.
the
I mean, I guess you could, but no.
little teapot, short and stout.
What not to do.
No, that's a great exercise, and I had a category for integrated work, so
That's my number 5.
that was your number 5. Yeah. So so your band walk is not
Nope.
your integrated work. Okay, all right. I like the lateral tube walking as well, and that didn't make it on my list specifically, but I also would consider that part of my core work, right? Core/integrated work, because of what you talked about, Wendy, with it being such a big glute activator. That's something that when I have my clients do it, which will probably be about 75% of the time, I'll alternate other exercises along with that lateral band work, just like standing clamshells. I'll do with that, but I do like that exercise a lot, um, as I said. But for my number 4, Wendy, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this one. I'm more I do a lot more grip work now
Okay.
than I did a couple years ago, right? Especially when that research article talked about the correlation between grip strength and mortality.
Yes.
So, yeah. And I've had more people, it's funny, within a span of like a few weeks, I had 2 um, prospective clients talk to me about how they had trouble opening jars.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We've talked about this before, but within a short time, and that's why it became top of mind for me as far as, okay, can you, when you're older or even now, are you the one who's trying to open up that jar of pickles, or, do you have to take out that little gripper tool? Or for me, if I had trouble, I'd take the like rubber gloves and just to get a better grip and turn it or run it under hot water, whatever you had to do to open a jar, or you just say, hey, can you open this for me? Right. So that's where grip work, I started to incorporate more of that in my clients' workouts in general. Whether it's how maybe doing some hanging work. So they're holding onto a bar like a pull-up bar, and they can do hanging knee raises or straight leg raises, or just simply holding onto the bar, right? Just to get their forearms and their grip stronger, not just stronger, but being able to grip longer, right? So just an endurance capacity from that vantage point.
Well, it's interesting because Dr. Marty Miller and I did a podcast on the Master Instructor Roundtable on grip strength. And it was interesting to see in the very beginning of time, if you guys missed that episode, when babies were born, they would actually have them hold on to bars just to see how strong they were as soon as they could even just turn their hands. And that's why they'll say babies grip your finger and they want to start gripping things. It shows that the baby's healthy. And it also will let you know that longevity is in their future, because it is a health indicator, which I really didn't know that much about it until we started researching more and more about it. And I found it fascinating. I do not have my clients start out. That is not one of my non-negotiables. However, when we start doing exercises, we do a lot of grip strength work. So farmer carries, like you said, hangs, we eventually get them into the pull-up bars and really try to work on that. And you'll often hear people say, I can lift a lot more, but my forearms hurt. So if someone's doing a deadlift, they'll they have those straps where you can put them on to help, you wrap it around the bar to help you lift it. So that's an indicator too, that there's obviously something that you need to work on. So I think that's very interesting, but it did not make my list. So there you go.
Well, I mean, there's, like you said, there's a lot of varying options. Carries are great, not just from the grip standpoint, but also putting stress on the shoulder and the spine. Wader walks, like a bottoms up kettlebell wader walk. So if I'm holding my kettlebell, if I'm holding the handle and the bottom is up, and I have to hold that bottom up above my wrist, above my elbow, and I'm holding that up there as I walk. So it's just a form of carry, as you mentioned, Wendy. but that's just one. And you don't have to go heavy if you guys want to try that one out. So you start off with an 8-9 pound kettlebell, hold the bottom up, handle, bottom, wrist, forearm, elbow, and just walk forward, backward for however long or whatever distance you can, and then see how far you can go or see how long you can hold it up there in that waiter position. So the waiter part is, if you imagine a waiter walking through a room, he's holding a platter on his wrist, and he's holding it up by his ear with his elbows up around chest height, but you just hold the kettlebell from that vantage point. So that's one that gets sneaky hard. You don't need a whole lot of weight, and that's why I like a lighter kettlebell with a bottom up formation to do some just more grip stability work. So I love it. My clients, they don't appreciate it while they're in it, while they're doing it, but it is one where they're like, hey, I can open a jar, right?
It's important. And I will tell you, I've noticed as I've gotten older and I do more and more manual work, because that's kind of a niche of mine. So I will do manual therapy with my clients. And then after that, we will go into their workouts, especially with my athletes. We actually do 30 minutes of that. And then we do an hour of training. So we have a 90-minute session. And I've noticed that my grip strength, because I use my hands so much, you would think I go in hard, I work really hard, but it's also a killer to my hands. And so I am the one that will have to grab something to open a jar, especially if I'm cooking or something where I'm like, wow, I really need to work on this more. So maybe I need to incorporate that in my non-negotiables.
There you go.
So my number 5, I'm going to go ahead and tell you my number 5 first, but that is where I put the integration work in. And so when we're talking about integration, I am now integrating my upper and my lower body together. So just as a recap, my number 1 was coffee. My number 2 then would immediately be my mobility work. So my foam rolling, my stretching. Then I go into some bridging. And when I say bridging, guys, we can actually put weight. It's almost like a hip thrust, but instead of using the bar, I'm using a dumbbell. And I will do that. I'll load my clients that have been doing this for a long time with me, or if someone's beginning, I don't put any weight on there. It depends on how their form looks and how their spine can control the weight. And then we do it for reps based on different types of tempos, which I think is also very important. My number 4 was then the dynamic type walks. So I had my 2 walking, but my number 5 then is the integration or total body exercises. So the exercise that I have myself or my clients do before we go into our resistance. So again, I don't count any body parts at this moment. My non-negotiable is usually a squat to row. And I can do, when you talked about balance, I often will do a single leg squat to row. So I am getting that balance component for everything that you said, plus all the research that's out there talking about the importance of balance and what it can do, especially for longevity, to avoid hip fractures and falls, which we know, unfortunately, can cause people to decline faster in life if they have that happen to them. So if you're learning and working on mechanics, and we're working on trying to get better dorsiflexion in the ankle, we'll do it on 2 feet. And then we go down into a squat, holding onto the cable. That cable allows me to work on the parallel lines for myself even, because I tend to have a weight shift. So I'm trying to really maintain proper alignment in my hip. And then they come up, we squeeze the glute, again, what we've done in the bridge, but then we add the rowing component for all the reasons you said you do your scapular work. So we go back, we really focus on keeping our shoulders in good alignment. We try to pinch the shoulder blades. So we're working our mid to lower trap and our rhomboids. And what's happening there is we're retraining our brain to make sure that our feet that are planted on the floor is in good connection with everything up the kinetic chain or up the rest of the body. So I find that whether I'm doing it single leg or double leg, and I'm doing a 1 arm or 2 arm, those are the primary components. And then to me, then I can make it more fancy or more challenging, because then I can do a single leg squat to row and maybe add some rotation. So then I start adding different planes of motion. But it's still the same exercise, but with varying ways of making it more challenging, but also something that's going to correlate better into some of the movements that I'm going to be doing in my workout.
I like that because I have it, like I said, it made my top 10, maybe not my top 5, but I will say that my number 5 is related to the integration, because my number 5 is a ground to stand, right? So you gave a great example, like a squat to row. So you have the upper body and the lower body working together, like you mentioned. But a ground to stand, as one exercise I might have my clients do, is a walking push-up, right? So they might start off with the ground, or I can have them start from standing up. So it's an integration exercise. And this kind of, if I'm going to put it into a bucket, that's the bucket it's going to go into as far as integration goes. So a ground to stand means now, like, I might have them start off on the ground. They'll walk, they'll keep their spine straight, and they'll keep their knees straight, and they'll walk their hands back towards their feet as they hinge through the hip, almost like they're in a downward facing dog position. But then once they get their hands close to their feet, then they stand up. And then once they're from that upright position, they'll come back down, reach down to their toes, and then they'll walk their hands out into a push-up position, perform a push-up. And where this falls into the integration category is that they have to keep their ears, shoulders, hips, knees, and ankles aligned. Great posture, good form through the shoulder blades especially, and that hip complex while they perform the push-up. And then they'll just repeat that. So they'll go into that hip hinge that we talked about earlier in this recording. And from there, they have the push-up, they have the hip hinge, and they're shifting their weight forward and back. So their center of gravity has to be contended with as they go from an upright to a prone position. So I think we're pretty close on that one. It's just the ground to stand for me is just giving somebody a better relationship with the ground. So being able to be on the floor, be comfortable on the floor, and be able to get up from the floor. So that sit to stand test that we talked about some episodes ago, as far as, again, its correlation with longevity and mortality, that has me thinking more about, okay, well, how can we get the total body to move after we've done our movement preparation, but yet still have somebody being able to be comfortable getting up and down, up off the floor. So that's
I love it. I mean, when you think about all the components of what you just said, so yes, you've got your core because it's not moving. Your spine is going to maintain proper alignment. You're working a lot on your stabilizers within the shoulder complex, which we know, especially with people that have weaker rotator cuff muscles, that's an unbelievable exercise to do. It's opposite of the inchworm, because instead of moving your feet, your feet just like that, you're moving your hands instead. So I like that. I incorporate that sometimes in my resistance, and when I'm doing more of a phase 1 type stabilization endurance exercise, I like that one a lot. It was not one of my non-negotiables, however. And so I've told you all my 5, and it's interesting, Ken, because we're on the same page, and then there's some that are a little bit different. And that's why every trainer is always going to have your non-negotiables. I know kind of my wrap up on why I chose these. I personally look at what the client needs and where their assessments are, what that assessment is showing me. And then at that point, I have seen over my 20 years of doing this, very much so, weaknesses in areas that are very common in these people, which is glutes and the outer hip, including myself, and then trying to get everything to work together as one unit. And so people will pick their favorite exercises to do for body parts. And that's something we could do a completely different podcast on that. But I think it's important for you, if you're a trainer and watching this, what are your non-negotiables that you do for yourself? And will that translate into your clients? Because I tell everyone, I expect this of you because I do this for myself. And I know that these are muscles that we need to make sure they're activated before we get you into your workout. And so I find them to be very, very important. And if I'm doing it and I'm saying it's non-negotiable, if I'm still working with a client and they get there early, they already know they're going to roll, they're going to stretch, they're going to bridge, and they're going to grab that band. And then we're going to begin the workout. So they can do that on their own. I tell them to do it at home. They could do it every single day. There's nothing that's going to become like so much so that, oh, you can only do this 3 days a week. This is something they can do 7 days a week, something that I think is going to be very valuable and important in what they do in life, but also especially before we get into the body parts at the gym.
Yeah. And, just from my 5, with mobility, core, balance, the ground to stand, and grip work, just like you, Wendy, these are things that we need to move better collectively. But also, I've got a little dash, a little sprinkling of, okay, well, what do we need to do to be viable and integrated as we get older? So can you open a jar? Do you have the grip strength to do that? Can you get up off of the floor? And for all the things that means for hip mobility, hip strength, hip stability, as far as getting down and up. So those are, just based on, like you said, okay, what does the client need today and what are they going to need later on? So it's not just about what do we need to incorporate for your immediate needs, but if we're looking a decade, 2 decades down the road, how are we going to set you up for success when it comes to where you see yourself being later in life? So I like this episode, Wendy, and I learned something about you. I learned something about you every time, but I'm glad that we had a chance to share what our priorities are, even though they took place in different forms. It looks like we're still on the same page.
Yes.
As always. All right.
As always.
I'll take it. So for those of you listening to us here, thank you so much for listening to us, both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, here on Random Fit on this episode on what our 5 non-negotiables are. So if you liked what you heard today, please share. Like, follow, subscribe, rate us if you can. But we hope to get other topics on here that we hope you will enjoy. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.